Tov, today's Daf Yomi, dedicated for Yeshua, for all of Am Yisrael, Hatzoah. So today's Daf Yomi, we're going to start on the bottom of Ayin Ches Amabez, the bottom of 78b. So the Mishnah tells us, Misha Nasan Rishos, Vashlucho, Lakadesh Bito, if a man gave permission to his agent to consecrate his daughter, and then the father went and he betrothed her on his own. If he betrothed her before the agent, Kiddushin. Then we're going to say his betrothal was a valid betrothal because the reason is that he canceled out the agency of the shliach by betrothing the girl himself, by betrothing her, by finding her a shidduch. And if the agent's betrothal came first, Kiddush of Kiddushin, then we're going to say it's a valid betrothal. The agent is a bit valid. And if we don't know who came first, then Shneim Nosnim get. Then both of the husbands give a get if she wants to get married to somebody else, because we have to be concerned that both of them are valid betrothal. And if they desire, one of them can give a get and the other one can marry her if they want. And so too, if there is a woman who she gave permission to her agent, to betroth her, and she went and she betrothed herself, if her betrothal comes before the agent's Kiddushin, it's a valid betrothal. And if the agents came first, then we're going to say Kiddush of Kiddushin. The agent's betrothal is valid. But if we don't know who came first, Shneim Nosnim get. Both of them have to give her a get. And if they desire, Echad Nosnim get, ve'echad kones. If they desire, one gives her a get, and the other one can stay married to her. So we basically have the same case taught twice. The first is if the father appoints an agent, and the second case if the girl herself appoints an agent. And then in both cases, they change their mind, the father and the girl, and they go out and betroth, either she betroths herself or the father betroths the girl. So the Gemara says, why do we need both cases? What's the reason why we need both cases? The Gemara explains. If we only had the case where the father appointed an agent, and then we say he cancels the agency, because we could say, Mishum Digavra Kimwe Biyuchsin. Why is he canceling the agency that he appointed? Because he knows how to find lineage. And so therefore, when he finds somebody who's of good yichus, he's going to betroth his daughter to him, and he canceled the agency. But maybe a woman, Rashi explains, a woman is not an expert in lineage. We might have said that even though she betrothed herself, she didn't really cancel the agent, and so therefore she didn't intend for Kiddushin to be valid, because she's of the position that maybe the agent will find somebody better. So if a woman did it, maybe it wouldn't be valid. This is how the maybe it wouldn't be maybe her Kiddushin would not be a valid Kiddushin. And if we only had the case of where the woman appointed an agent and then she betrothed herself, I would say Mishum Daiko Mitzvah. There she cancels the agent because she knows who she's marrying, and so she cancels the other person. She's careful. But the father, maybe he doesn't care. He finds the guy, he's happy. And so therefore we needed it to be taught in both cases that when they betroth themselves without the agent, they're canceling the agency. Idmar, the Gemara says, we learned Kadsha of Kitchavia. B'derech, let's say the father betroths her while he's on the road, he's not at home. And at the same time, she betroths herself in the city. And she's an adult. We just have to review this. We're coming to the end of Seder Nashim. While she's an adult, only she can betroth herself. While she's a minor, only her father can betroth her. While she's a Nara, that we saw there was a dispute in the Gemara. And while she's a Nara, for sure the father can betroth her as well. So therefore, the stage of Nara is between the age of 12 and 12 and a half. So the Gemara says, so she was, and now we discover her. Her father accepted the betrothal in the city, on the road, and she was in the city, and she accepted her betrothal. And now we look at her, and she's an adult. We checked her out to know if she's an adult, in which case her father wasn't able to do it. And we discover that day that she's an adult. So Rav says, Rav says, let's look at it right now. She's an adult. And so therefore her betrothal is valid and not her father's. Shmuel says, no. Shmuel says we have to be concerned that maybe when her father accepted the betrothal, therefore she was a Nara. She was between the age of 12 and 12 and a half. She was not yet an adult. And her Kiddushin is therefore preceded by his Kiddushin, and so therefore Kiddushin is not valid, and his Kiddushin is valid. So that's what Shmuel's position is. So the Gemara says, Amos, when are we talking about? If it was within the 6 months, meaning to say there are 6 months from this time you start Narus until you become an adult. Because that's what we say in Nida, that there's no distinction between Narus and Bagros except for 6 months. And when she brings these simanim of Narus, then from that moment on, it's only a period of six months. Sometimes it goes quicker, and then you can see the simanim on her, you could see the recognition on her body. But most of the time, it's a maximum of 6 months. So if we want to say that this took place within the 6 months, why would Rav there in that circumstance say, oh, now she's an adult, which means she was an adult beforehand? Why don't we say, why won't we say that this is the moment that she became an adult? Meaning within those 6 months, we assume she's a Nara, and we check her. We're going to say that this is the moment she became a Bogeris, not prior to this, because those 6 months, the assumption is she's a Nara. So, but if it was the checking after 6 months, why would Shmuel there in that circumstance say we have to be concerned that when her father betrothed her, and therefore perhaps both of them are that she would need a divorce from both? Shmuel says there's only a total of 6 months, and so therefore for sure she was an adult there. So therefore Gemara says, no, we're talking about a circumstance where she became betrothed on the very last day of the 6 months, the day where the 6 months ends. So, and her father did the betrothal in the morning, and she got it at night. And so this day she was in the chazak, so it was the presumptive status that she was going to become an adult. Rav says, Rav says she's an adult in front of us. I mean, the hash to Bogeris b'tzafra namar Bogeris, from the fact that she's an adult now, we're going to say in the morning she was also an adult, because the whole day she was in the assumption that she was going to become an adult. Shmuel says, Hashtu the Isi Simanim. Shmuel says, no, just now is the moment where she brings forth the Simanim. So therefore, Shmuel is going to say that we don't. The Gemara says, Shmuel Amar Hashtu the Isi Simanim, but we don't say that earlier she had the Simanim. So the Gemara asks the question. So this idea of Shmuel that we say that we look backwards and we say that this is the moment that she became an adult, but prior to this it wasn't. But why is this different? Ma'ishna mi mikvah. Shmuel seems to be arguing with the case of the mikvah, because what do we learn about a mikvah? There's the Mishnah in Nida. Mishnah and mikvah tells us the following: mikvah shenimda. Let's say you measure a mikvah, v'nimtza chaser, and now all of a sudden you discover it doesn't have the required amount of 40 sa. So we say kol tahara shenatzo gaba v'mafreya. That anything that you put in that mikvah, looking backwards, meaning even if it was Rosh Hashanah, normally we're lenient by public domain Tumah, but in this case we're going to say it's retroactively Tameh. Everything is Tmeos, because we're going to say it's certainly Tameh. And so we see from here that the moment you find it is what we say it was initially. This argues with Shmuel, because Shmuel says the moment we find it is not what we say it was initially. We say that initially she was a Nara, even though she's in a Bogeres. But according to this Mishnah, since it's missing now, going backwards until you know for sure it was full, we say it was missing. So therefore, we should say, according to Shmuel, from the fact that it's in the morning, from the fact that she's an adult now, we should say she was an adult in the morning, because the whole day she was in the chazaka that she was going to become an adult. So it's a question on Shmuel. So the Shmuel will answer, no. Shani also in that case is different. No, that case is different because we could say, listen, we're going to take all the tumah that went in there. I'm going to say, let's keep their presumptive status that it's tamei. Ve'emer lo tavel, and say that they were never immersed. Immersed is adarabah, just the opposite. Hemen mikvah chaskaso. Ve'emer lo chaser. Why don't we say, let's assume that the mikvah was not missing anything? That's its chazaka. That's its presumptive status. The Gemara says, no, harei chaser lefanecha. No, we see it missing. Hachanami harei bogeras lefanecha. Well, here too also, we see. So the Gemara says, well, in this case also, we're going to say, harei bogeras lefanecha. So we're saying she's an adult. So why don't we say that therefore, since she's an adult, that Shmuel should recognize that she's an adult here the whole time? Gemara says, no, hashu to pagra. So we could say no. Shmuel would say, no, this is the moment when she became an adult. When Gemara says, if that's the case, hasam nami hashu de chaser. Well, why don't we say in that case of the mikvah that this is the moment where it became missing? So Gemara explains, hasam in the case of the mikvah, there's two things that are problematic, two bad things. Here in this case, it's one bad thing. So in the case of the mikvah, there's two bad things. What are the two bad things that it has? First of all, we're going to assume that the object that went in, the presumptive status was tamei, and right now it's missing. But in the case of the Kiddushin, there's just one thing bad, and that is that she's an adult in front of us. But that's just that she's a Bulgaris. But the fact, but if you want to say, let's presume her status that she was not an adult, we can't say that because that's the last day of the 6 months was the day she was set to change. So therefore, it's just Chadol Reusa. Where it says, well, Shmuel seems to be arguing with another case. Why is Shmuel arguing with the case of a barrel of wine? Now we have a brisa. If you have a barrel of wine, which you use that barrel to take your truma from for all your other wine, you go there, you look at it, it's wine, and every time you want to drink your wine, your non-tithed wine, you say, I'm taking one portion from that barrel. So, and you set it aside. So the Gemara says, Shmuel, the Tanya, let's say you checked your barrel of wine, truma, to separate the truma from it, and then you leave, and then afterwards you discover that it's not wine, it's vinegar. You can't take truma from vinegar for wine. So we say there, kol gimel yamim vadai. The first 3 days after you checked the barrel, we're going to say it's wine. From that point on, we're going to say that we're not sure if you tithed it. It's a suffix because we don't know whether or not it was truma, and so therefore the if it's suffix if it's truma, and so therefore, a non-Kohen cannot eat it, and you have to go back and take another truma again. So the Gemara says, and so in that case, V'aminan chavas hamikvah. We challenge what's the reason for the contradiction or the argument between the case of the barrel and the case of the mikvah. Why in the case of the mikvah we say everything in retrospect is tamei. Where in the case of the wine, we say everything is suffix truma. It's a doubt if it's truma. Who's the author of the barrel? This is Rabbi Shimon. The Gabi mikvah nami sveika mashri. Then in the case of the mikvah, he also says it's not for sure tummy going backwards, but it's a doubtful tummy. The Tanya kol tarosh and nasu agaba v'mafreibem rishus yachbem rishus aravim tameos. The Brisa says every taharos that you put in this mikvah, which you discover is deficient now, we're going to say, the Tanakama says, it's tamei, even in the public domain, whereas Rabbi Shimon says, b'rishus aram taharos, b'rishus yachad toen, that if it's the public domain, we're going to say it's tahar, because suffix tuma, doubtful case of tuma in the public domain is tahar, but it's only in the private domain that we're going to say is tamei. Avol Rabbanan, but according to the Rabbanan, the Rabbanan would say in this case, and this is the question on Shmuel, that going backwards, everything is going to be considered untithed. And if that's the case, the Rabbanan are saying that everything going backwards is tevel, and so this is a question. So this is a question on Shmuel, because Shmuel says with respect to the Nara that we're going to say that the father's Kiddushin we have to be concerned for. Out of the fact that maybe she was a Nara, even though now she's an adult. But according to the Rabbanan, we look at the daughter as she is now, and so therefore that's how she was in the time of the Kiddushin. Meaning to say, just right now it's vinegar. That's how it was the whole time. But according to Shmuel, we have to be concerned that since right now, that even though now she's a Bulgaris, earlier we don't assume she was. So it's a question on the Rab. So it's a question from the Rabbanan on Shmuel. So Gemara says no. Shani Has, in the case of the wine is different. The equal meimar hemad tevel chaska. So we could say let's put the wine in its state of being untied, the chazak of tevel, the emar lo niskin. Gemara says just the opposite. Adrab hemad yain chaska. So let's put the wine on its presumptive status, emar lo hichmetz, and say it didn't become. And say never became vinegar. So why would you say that it was never tied? Why don't we say just the opposite? That it was always in its status of wine. It didn't become vinegar. So Gemara says, no, right now it's vinegar. Well, so too in this case, we see she's a Bulgaris, and so therefore we should be able to say that the father's Kiddushin is nothing. Gemara says no. Shmuel would say Hashtu Debagger. Now she became an adult. Well, the Gemara says, well, Hachanami or Hasam Nami Hashtu Deichmetz. Well, that too. Now is when it became vinegar. So the Gemara says, okay, the distinction Shmuel says is Hasam Tartul Riu. So in the case of the wine, there's two things that are bad. One is that now it's vinegar, and two, it was a chazaka that it was untithed. And in the case of Bulgaris, there's only one reyosa that right now we see her that she's an adult, but the fact that she was a Nara is not exactly a chazaka, because that's the last day of the 6 months she was set to change. So Gemara says, let's say that this dispute between Rav and Shmuel, Neima Ketanai, let's say it's Machokas Tanayim, we're on the top of Ayin Tesama base, mi motzi miyad mi, that we're having a case where if a person is a shlimer, if he's about to die, and he wants to give away his possessions, he's able to give them away, but if he gave away all his possessions, if he recovers, he can take them back. But now the question is that he claims, I was sick, and so therefore he can take him back. But the other person says, no, you were healthy, and you can't take it back. So, mi motzi mi ami, who has the presumptive status? So we learned in this brisa, hu motzi mi adam below raya. He can take it back from them even without furnishing any proof that he was sick. Rabbi Yaakov says if the other person wants to take it, he has to prove that he was healthy. Whereas Rabbi Nazan says in Bariu, if he's healthy now, then the man has to bring proof that he was sick. And if he's sick now, they have to bring a proof that he was actually healthy. So name a Rav, so let's assume that Rav is of the position like Rabbi Nassan, because Rav says we look at the status the way it is now, we assume that was the status beforehand. So maybe Rav is saying just like Rabbi Nassan, who Shmuel the Amrak Rabbi Yaakov. And maybe Shmuel is saying like the status of Rabbi Yaakov, that we don't look at the status that it was now, but rather, we look at the status of what it was beforehand. And so that's what Shmuel is saying. So the Gemara says, no, I'm a Rav, I feel like Rabbi Yaakov. Rav says, I can really even hold like Rabbi Yaakov. Ad kan will come a Rabbi Yaakov Hasam. Why does Rabbi Yaakov say in the case of the Shchiv Merah that we go back to the earlier status? Why does Rav say that? Because there we could say, let's put the money back in its presumed. But we can't say let's put the body back into its previous status. We can't say that. The reason why we can't say that is because the body was about to change. It was expected to change. And so therefore we can't say let's put the body back in its previous status. So Shmuel says, I will say even like Rabbi Nassan, Ad kan lo ka'amar. Why does Rabbi Nassan say that we go by the status of what they are now? Ad kan will come Rabbi Nassan Hasam to Koyama B'cheskas Priyam Kami, because generally speaking, everybody's in the status of being healthy. Madika Mapki Navshe Michazaka Havalay Suyiraya, the one who's going to have to uproot this chazaka, he has to bring the proof. But in our case of the Pogaris, Mika Navsha Michazaka de Kamei. But in the case of the woman who's an adult, would we say in the morning she Nara or Bogeris? We're not sure in the morning, and so therefore she herself is uprooting herself from that chazaka, and so therefore it's not a clear case. Name Akani tonight. So the Gemara says, let's assume. So the Gemara says, let's assume that this is a machokas tanoim. Kidsha avia b'derach, v'kidsha atzma ba'ir. So one brisa says that if her father betrothed her in the city or on the road, and she betrothed herself in the city, harei bogeres, now she's an adult. Tanachada, one brisa says harei bogeres lefanenu, she's an adult like Rav. Presumably, v'tanya idoch hashino kiddushin shneim. Other brisa says we have to be concerned for both of them. And that seems to be like Shmuel. My Rav chad k'Rav chad Shmuel. The Gemara says no. Not necessarily. Idi kiddush Shmuel. Both could be like Shmuel. Even the Bryce says, "Oh, now she's an adult, therefore we view her as an adult." Could be like Shmuel. Why? So one is the case where she is saying, one is where she's saying that where she's an adult and she contradicts her father and she says, "No, I was already an adult from yesterday." And therefore, we're going to say she's an adult in front of us. But where she doesn't contradict them, she doesn't say she was an adult from yesterday, then we're going to be like Shmuel, we have to be concerned for both. So the Gemara says, well, from the fact that we could say it's not necessarily the case that the Brises are arguing, maybe the Rav and Shmuel are not necessarily arguing. The Gemara says, no, we're not going to say that, because with Tizbara, Rabbi Yosef, Rei Derav, Menashe mitvio avad uvda kavasi derav. He once ruled like Rav. Big but Shmuel, and Shmuel was upset. He said, "Kuli alma kailei v'kava zuta v'amid rabbanim kailei v'kava." Rabbi, he says the whole world, all the wisdom of the world has one measure, meaning to say, the whole world assumes kuli alma kailei. The whole world is going to be relying upon the fact that they have this amount of a small measure of wisdom, and this rabbi, Rabbi Yosef Menashe, who rules like Rav, he got such a large amount. He's so confident. If you want to really say they're not arguing, why does he have to say like that? Why doesn't he just say Why was he arguing? Maybe the reason why he ruled like Rav is because in that case, the girl was contradicting her father's claim. So Amrlei Marzutra or Rashi, Amar Meimer Hilchos Lekavasi the Shmuel. So Meimer said the law is like Shmuel. Ravashi says Hilchos Lekavasi the Rav. Says the law is like Rav. The Hilchos Lekavasi the Rav. The law is like Rav. That we look at her now, we say she's a Bogeris. So now up to the next Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Misha Yatza Hu Ve'ishto Medina Sayam. A man and his wife go overseas, and then he comes back with his wife and his children. Vamar Isha Shayatzas Imi Medina Sayam. Hare. He says, this woman who went out with me overseas, this is her. And this is her children. He doesn't need to bring a proof. Or Isha doesn't need to bring proof that this is his wife or his children. Mesa, if the wife died, Mesa, if the wife died and he claims this is her children, maybe Raya Abanim, he has to bring a proof that this is her children. Maybe Raya Isha doesn't have to bring a proof about the woman. Let's say he says Isha Nasat Vimdinasam. He says, let's say I married a woman overseas. Hare Hizu, Ve'elu Banea. This is her, and these are her children. Maybe Raya Isha, he has to bring a proof that the woman had good yichus. But then he doesn't need to bring a proof about their children. Mesa, he said she dies, then he has to bring a proof. He has to bring a proof that the woman had good yichus, and he has to bring a proof he has to bring a proof about the children. And When do we believe that the children are the mother's children? Only when the children are kruchim achareh. Only when they're hanging on her every word, meaning to say that they're following her around. And indeed, Tan Rabbanan, Isha Nasati B'dina Sayam. Bryce says if he says I married a woman overseas, maybe Raya Isha brings a proof that this is his wife. And he doesn't have to bring a proof about the children. Maybe Raya Gedolim. He has to bring a proof about the adult children, not about the minor ones. That's when do we say this? When there's one woman, he could bring when he has one wife, then he doesn't need to bring a proof that it's her children. But if he had two wives, maybe Isha they have to bring a proof about all the children, because it's possible that the first wife died and the second one is raising the children. So this is what the Gemara says. I just want to add on. I was thinking about this overnight, that it says Rav Barafuna v'kulam b'kruchim acharah. This is when the children are hanging around her, that they're following her. So if a person has a wife overseas and then it comes back with the children, then if the children are hanging on her, then we believe that these are her children. But all of Kiddushin is really a metaphor for a relationship with Hashem. So we could say like this, that if we go overseas, if we go to Medina Sayyam, if we go into exile, then how do we know if Hashem is our mother? We know Hashem is our mother if we're kruchim achareh. If we're committed and following after Hashem at all times, then we'll know that Hashem is our mother. Otherwise, we won't know. Then the world won't know that Hashem is our mother. Okay, we'll stop here. God willing, we go. If anybody has a question.